Welcome one, welcome all to this inaugural podcast of the Real Renaissance series. Our first ever guest here is Mr. Ben McLeish. Is that pronounced correctly?
Absolutely, sir.
Fantastic. He is the UK representative, or one UK representative, of the Zeitgeist Movement, and he's be joining us today to tell us exactly what that means. So, Ben, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself?
Sure. It's always weird introducing myself to people who may not have heard of me before, because it would be like me hearing somebody going, "Hi, I'm Dave Smith, and here are the following things that you might care about."
Or like Luigi from Sicily. Like.
That's right, yeah. First thing to note, I suppose, is that I'm not anybody in particular, and I will go down in history as such, as will most of us, as no one in particular. Mm-hmm. And what might be recorded will probably be inaccurate. But I have, for the past probably almost 5 years, along with many other crazy, hardworking, strange people in the UK, have been representing the general train of thought that has come to pass in the wake of many, many hundreds of years of failure on the side of politics and business and all that shenanigans, which seems to form part of our media coverage of our own selves and other countries over the years, and have tried to chisel out and promote a worldview and a form of social behavior and social action and society itself, which relies on not simply pandering to what people think they want or what will get the most votes or what's popular, but on a scientific worldview of the world and understanding that we have to maximize the life ability of everybody on the planet, of all life on the planet, really, and that is that is not a subset of the economy, that the economy in general and life in general is a subset of the requirements of life on the planet. There was a guy called Nate Hargens who was a peak oil, he's still alive actually, is a peak oil analyst who leads that way, saying, I wish I'd understood much earlier in my life that the economy is a subset of the environment, not the other way around. And so we take that train of thought and we try and expand it into a general demand for a society which is not any longer what we would call democratic, but one that is emergent based on increased scientific understanding, and that we're willing to remodel our ways and our behaviors and our memes, if you like, according to what we now understand, rather than what has been tradition, what has been popular, what gets the most votes, what's easy to describe in sound bites, and all the rest of it. You might notice I'm already having trouble giving you a very briff introduction to this because there's nothing brief about it. Indeed. You might already find yourself bored and switching to another podcast. Please don't. But that's what we try and do. We try and do it succinctly. We fail very often to do it succinctly. But it's the love of science and technology, the understand that human cooperation and harmony is your security, and not the idea that jackbooted people with guns are somehow your security, or that no guns whatsoever are your security. Yes. But that the general tendency to get people not to even consider violence and not have to rely on violence for their own success or the success of their families or those around them is the real security.
I'd definitely say that violence is largely a result socially of scarcity. And if we're going to go down that whole scarcity topic, how does the Zeitgeist Movement address the core economic problem of unlimited wants and desires and needs and projects and limited resources?
Sure. It is a touchstone. It's almost like a go-to discussion by any modern libertarian that human beings are infinitely want creation machines. Mm-hmm. I've never really understood how they can say this, because before the iPad existed, there was no demand or want for an iPad. It seems more likely that as things are marketed, those things can be marketed successfully or not successfully, and they rely on tried and tested and publicly understandable tools of coercion to get you to want them. That word coercion is also a touchstone for libertarians, but they don't ever seem to marry it up with the idea of creating wants. Mm-hmm. If anybody ever wants to read a decent essay on this by a man who wasn't a libertarian, The Ideological Genesis of Needs by Jean Baudrillard will give you a very succinct, if a little bit of an education, or sort of wildly philosophical view of how one can create what is then considered a need. I need an iPad is never serious as a thing to say. You don't need it. There are human needs. there is the requirement for fresh water, for clean air, for the lack of pollution, for a mantle around the earth. So what we say is that we don't have infinite wants. We do have very definite needs, and those needs have to be met, or you will foster a population that doesn't get on with itself or each other, and can cause a lot of violence and different kinds of violence too, not just punching people in the face, but you will have the violence of those who live in poverty, not, for example, having adequate nutrition and all dying 25 years earlier. Is this not a form of violence? We maintain it is, and we maintain that those kinds of stratifications are implicitly violent and have built into them a self-knowledge, knowing that you're the poor, knowing that you're despised by the rich, that it has an effect on you. Now, when it comes to wants, when it comes to, for example, recreational materials that we want to have fun with, like the newest computer or exciting toys or getaways and fun holidays and stuff like that, these can be pursued in different ways, can't they? I mean, you could decide to take your family on a camping trip by using horse and cart, or by using a smog-producing steam train, which would take longer to get there, produce more pollution, and would probably be less comfortable. But of course, then you could also do it by magnetic levitation train, couldn't you? That would be extremely fast, that would be almost zero on the pollution scale, and which would afford you a better time of things. Well, so if we can...
Here we do approach a core issue whereby the technological options that we have available to us now are kind of incompatible with the governing structure that we now have. So in order to solve the problems of pollution and the inefficient way that we're wasting resources, you're basically going to need an entirely new society.
Do you think it can't be achieved incrementally and isn't already happening?
It depends on the willingness of people to put certain things into action. In terms of applying like rational thought to social problems, I was reading a study this morning, and it was about babies whose mothers go to prison, and they did like a kind of like a split testing thing whereby some babies were given into the care system and other babies were left with their mothers in the prisons. And by far and away, like the babies that grew up even in the prison environment but with their mothers, they came out much psychologically healthier. They came out as much kind of, better human beings, if we put it that way. And yet the result of this fairly comprehensive study was nothing really, because all the implicit assumptions of punishing the mother and putting her away and taking the baby and putting it into care, they were just so deeply entrenched in people's minds that no action was ever taken, even though it was a fairly logical conclusion that was reached. So I guess sorry, you're saying?
No, I was going to say that's a very good point. We do find ourselves in need of concerted action because one can prove over and over and over again that there is a better way, and that those better ways have been tested. A much larger scale one is Anatakis Mokus, the guy who took over Bogota in Colombia as their mayor, and demonstrated, for example, that people respond much better to being shamed than to being fined when crossing a road in like jaywalking. Like he hired. The situation was this: there were many thousands of cases of jaywalking all the time in Bogota, and it was horrendous because people are in danger. It screws up the traffic and all the rest of it, and people would be fined all the time. But no one gave a shit. No one said, oh, I better not, cross the street, because no one cared. But when Mokus hired about 200 mimes to take the piss out of them as they were crossing the street, the problem vanished. But has that been rolled out elsewhere? Not really, right? I mean, almost never do we go, oh, you know what, actually social reinforcement is much better than fining people. It's just has not been adopted. He did a bunch of other stuff as well that resulted in water bills coming down. There was a ladies' night where men would stay home with the kids and the ladies would all go out and have a great time, to sort of balance out the thing like that. Of course, the guy who took over from Mokus didn't keep any of those principles, and it hasn't been adopted anywhere else either. But I think that little by little you do win by having these pockets of stuff. I mean, we can't just hope for everything to be enacted by a large government above us, and until then nothing will change. I don't think that's the correct way of looking at things.
I mean, where does TZM stand on direct action? Has there been any kind of direct action that's been undertaken by members?
Yeah, it depends what you mean by direct action. I suppose it would be the sort of pronounced, almost very obvious kinds of things. Let's see. My favourite example still is the Canadian chapter in Toronto, where several members, they split out for a reason that is more to do with economics than anything else. And they basically founded a tool library. Now, a tool library isn't a new idea. They didn't think of it. But the tool library is a very simple one. People tend to go down to their Home Depot or whatever and buy very expensive tools for maybe 1 or 2 jobs and then never use them again and have them sitting around.
You use them like twice a year.
Exactly, yeah. And so these things are, in that sense, a phenomenal waste of resources. That kind of access, which is open to everybody with the money, is a waste of resources. So what they do is they collected a lot of second-hand tools, sometimes from very large companies who had large stores of these old tools that were still perfectly good, but just not being used, and would have them placed centrally. And then for about $100 a year, you can then have infinite access to any of the tools you require, with late fees and all the rest of it, which are very, very minimal compared to the buying of a $2,000 specialist drill or whatever, you know. So that is a form of direct action because it means that consumption in general drops down. Other members, I would actually consider direct action to include buying a 3D printer, buying an electric car if you can, traveling less, you know. But then there are things like political direct action, which is probably what you're really asking me about. That's a very hard thing to do because TZM is very divided on this, and I think it's okay that it is divided on this. Some members feel that petitioning or lobbying the government directly is a waste of time, purely because they're not in charge anyway. The general genetics of the kind of place you live is usually dictated by large businesses. If it weren't, then you'd have to show me that there is absolutely no lobbying going on and there is no such thing as political corruption in your area.
Well,
then they would have real power.
I think it's a mixture of both, in that you have the commercial sector and you have the state sector, so to speak, kind of complicit in the same system. I wouldn't say it's that the economic system owns the state. It's the state and the economic system kind of work hand in hand. So obviously, corporations, well, in the UK at least, aren't deploying armies on the streets and whatnot. It's the government that deploy the police, and it's the government that have the intelligence agencies. It's the government that own GCHQ. And whilst they do work to corporate benefit, and I think we do actually have now advertisements and commercialism going on with the police, whereby they're sponsored by certain companies and whatnot. I'd say both sectors of society are complicit.
Do you think that they're separate sectors? This is something I think about quite a lot.
I think the people within the sectors probably think they're separate at certain levels. Like if you ask your average policeman, he wouldn't see any direct relationship between, let's say a company like Siemens or something, and the state that he works for and his job description, his job position. But in reality, I mean, we don't need to look at the water cannons that Boris is buying, and I'm sure he's got a cosy relationship with the company that he's bought those off, and it just seems to feed off of each other.
So when a large part of the government's defense industry gets sold off to private corporations phenomenally cheaply, do you in your head imagine that something is moving from one sector to another, or do you rather consider that the method of running that part of the infrastructure is just simply adapted to a more corporate behavior and is actually not moved anywhere?
Well, there's two kind of points that spring to mind on that example. The first is like what I call the feed and fleece cycle, and it's the way that they privatise and nationalise industries, in kind of cycles. And it seems like they'll make an industry public in order to put the taxpayers' money into it in order to build up infrastructure. And then once that infrastructure is built, they'll then privatise it, sell it to their friends. And they'll run down the service, whack up the prices until everyone's crying out for some form of nationalisation again. And the cycle then just starts all over again. And in terms of the weapons industry and government, I don't remember, we were talking about Mark Thomas earlier before we started coming on air, and he did that awesome show to do with weapons exports and
that's amazing.
Subsidies.
Yeah. The one where he becomes a weapons dealer, right?
Yeah, that's the craziest thing. I couldn't believe he'd made this show. I was blown away. one of the best things I've ever seen. But I mean, more importantly, as a part aside from the entertainment factor, was I just couldn't believe that the government was taking people's money and basically secretly making you subsidise weapons exports to some of the most heinous regimes on the planet. I mean, it's insane. And then here we are.
They're insured as well, aren't they? They're insured against loss. And that's actually true of the Americans now as well, is that the only international thing is it's absolutely insured on the receiver's side of things as well.
It's insane, especially when, you turn on the television and they're talking about austerity and how we are all in it together and we need to make sacrifices. So I thought to myself, okay, so they must have stopped all the weapons subsidies then. And, you go and look it up. Obviously not, no. It was a silly idea. We don't need to feed children or house the elderly. What we need to do is sell missiles to Saudi Arabia or whatever.
So does it not dawn on you then, and I'm sure it would have done, does it not maybe dawn on the listener that since the problems appear to be equal and seem to be universal, we maintain, and I think it's true, that no matter whether it's government or whether it's private industry,
it's systemic.
The ruling systemic value is money. That's the problem. Is that as long as, and it could be called anything else, it could be survival credits, it could be gold, it doesn't matter if it's backed by government or not.
It's just plain old power, really. It's just plain old power.
Well, money is power, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Power is just the ability to enrich your own life at the expense of others, surely. I can't think of any other way that means. I suppose there is a psychological thing of being able to be Henry Kissinger and go, I can make the following thing happen, and that alone is the ultimate aphrodisiac, as he would say.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you've come across... you might actually enjoy this book even more than I do because it's got a kind of a strong scientific element that I thought actually took away from the argument. But it's called Political Ponerology.
Oh no, it's great. I'm Andrei Lobachevsky. Yes, it's on my desk.
The one. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I thought the argument that he made in terms of we live in this kind of scarcity-driven system where it's a form of pathocracy. Like the people that are most ruthless, the people that can amass for themselves without any concern for the side effects or any concern for the impacts on others. They gradually have risen to the top of this moneyed system, and it's got to the stage now where it doesn't matter what country you're looking at; it's just run by a bunch of hardcore killers,
Yeah, it's slightly oversold by Lobachevsky. The story behind that book is fascinating. There was a secret double-blind group of scientists through Europe in the 1920s and 30s, of which Lobachevsky was one. And they were amassing this data to try and work out whether power and psychopathy correlated. In other words, the more powerful people are, the more those places sort of attract those who are not hindered by the emotional baggage of ordinary human beings that have guilt and sadness impulses.
Well, responsibility is scary, right? And if you're a psychopath who has shallow emotions, then you're not going to feel this weight of responsibility on taking on these huge roles.
Absolutely, and it's certainly demonstrated to be true. It's certainly demonstrated to be true as well. If you want to compare it to Snakes in Suits by Bob Hare, the man who wrote the psychopathy checklist, or if you want to read on a more lighter note, John Ronson's book, The Psychopath Test. Both of them talk about this sort of area. It does seem to be between 1% and 3% of CEOs are psychopaths, which is about 4 times higher than the average collection of them. So, Lobachevsky says a couple of interesting things. One thing he says is that it would appear that the way to get out of this is to form a society based on, and I think I'm quoting him deliberately here, based on the laws of nature.
Yeah.
That's what he says. And the laws of nature certainly show that there doesn't appear to be psychopathic behavior everywhere. In fact, certain troops of monkeys do not reward psychopathic behavior, and in fact that kind of self-interested behavior is actually shamed by animal communities. So it's not, we always think of nature red in tooth and claw thanks to Tennyson and other people who sort of made it poetic, but it's not the case.
Yeah.
It's not that everything outside is trying to kill you, and that's because it's just after its own thing. Even Dawkins in The Selfish Gene makes a very clear argument that it's the gene action that's selfish, not the individuals that are looking out for themselves selfishly. That would actually select against your genes.
Even that's old news in a sense that Kropotkin was writing about the idea of mutual aid being a factor within evolution. What year was that? Was it the end of the 19th century or something?
Yeah, that's right. It was a very long time ago, and that's free online now as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I did international relations at uni, and we did a lot of kind of what they call political philosophy, and there was no real mention of some of what I could say, some of these landmark texts that really kind of illuminate things. Instead, they start you off with Plato, and you go and you read Hobbes, and you learn all about how life is cruel and short and brutish, and how we need governments to look after us, and how at the end of the day, I think the best thing would be a global government to stop all the wars. And that was kind of like the entire journey of political philosophy at undergraduate level.
That was it. Interesting.
Yeah, that was in a nutshell, yeah.
My girlfriend at the time was also doing politics and international studies, and I always laugh when I think back now and how I should have been listening really to what she was talking about, Proudhon and all the rest of it, because it ultimately became relevant to me about 10 years later. At the time, I thought it was the most pointless thing of all. But yeah, we come back to this question of direct action. If there is this old news element to it now, that we know that, there is, if you want to prevent horrendous people and horrendous institutions from behaving in that psychopathic way. And knowing now that as we do, it's now 20 years, by the way, since The Corporation came out, the film, that corporations behave according to this as well. If we want to avoid that, you do have to start advocating for a kind of society where voting would be a form of irrationality, where you would say, I want this human being to be in charge of a thing that runs in our society. That would be the most incoherent thing to say, and that people need to start almost gradually understanding what an emergent society looks like. What does it look like if you can, to as close a degree as possible, automate most things in your life so that it does not rely on the whims of human beings? For example, if everybody had a 3D printer that could print metal as well, so you can now print circuit boards, how would that look for the idea of shopping centres and for individual people who try and, do the sort of individualistic thing and create a shop or create some kind of business like that? Well, it would look ghastly, wouldn't it? Because now we can all sort of almost individually, but in a linked and networked way, download the schematics for anything, print it at home, and have served ourselves directly without the idea of shipping this stuff internationally from east to west, burning up as much fuel as 50 million cars in one go, and making the whole thing more efficient, making it responsive, making it impossible to have taken away from me because of the whims of some politician, because it's a distributed system. What does it look like when we do that with energy? What does it look like when we do it with cars? What does society end up looking like?
Well, as soon as you start to decentralise in that fashion with manufacturing, you also bring back the traditional social kind of interaction that we used to have in the old village structure, whereby you have the guy over there that hammers the horseshoes, and the guy over there that makes the saddles, and that guy's pretty good at this, and that guy's pretty good at that. And once people have more of a reliance upon each other as opposed to simply a reliance on their employers, maybe then the value system can be given space to change and evolve.
Well, we would certainly end up, I think, more interactive, yes, but I don't think that it would be divided that way. I don't think there'd be specialization anymore, because you are by definition a generalist if you can download any schematic for anything you don't necessarily understand yourself. You've almost delivered that part of knowledge out into the internet, like you're asking it to be your exo brain, like as Kurzweil would say, how do I build a lamp? I don't know. I know how to search it, and I know how to download it, and I know how to make my 3D printer do it. Someone else knows how to design that, and so do 5,000 other people, and they will actually improve upon several general schemata rather than competing ones. They don't have a livelihood attached to yours being downloaded over someone else's. So hopefully we'd get the best of both.
I was just thinking in terms of, let's say we do the decentralised power generation. I mean, who's going to build the generators? Are there going to be specific kind of plants that build these things, or is it going to be like a community effort where people get together and they build the generator, as a group?
Depends how you envision the renewables. So Germany seemed to do very, very well without it being centralized. The only centralized thing they did was to have a government mandate that said that you get financial reward, money off the equipment if you put solar on your roof. And they've done that for the past 30 years. They have unfortunately stopped doing it now. And that does mean that about 25% of Germany's very energy-intensive economy comes from solar. And they did it without large companies doing it once. They did it almost incrementally. And it's now started in the UK. I must admit, over the last 5 years, I've seen a huge shoot up of sort of, solar on roofs. I don't know how financially intensive it's been for those people to do that. I don't knock on their doors and ask them.
Well, my friend's dad's got solar on his roof. Basically, you get a small subsidy from the government, and then I think what he was saying is that it takes about 5 to 7 years for it to kind of recoup the investment, and then after that, you're home and dry. But I think he was also saying that it really depends on the time of year and how much sunlight they're getting. So at certain times of the year, he's still going to have to rely upon the national grid.
Absolutely. So he's reduced his need by about 30%, or something like that.
It's been considerable, but I'm not sure how they're rewarding homeowners that do it in terms of like feed-in kind of charges, where they get paid for any electricity they donate to the national grid. I know Australia is pretty good at that, but
yes, they certainly have been going at it since at least 2006. Certainly, there's a mixture of things, isn't there? Feed-in tariffs, smart grids. Jeremy Rifkin really claims that Europe is really far ahead of the game in this. He seems to idealize Europe a lot in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that is just to do with Germany, but certainly Scandinavia as well. Now they found actually that their onshore wind is actually the cheapest form of energy there is for them. So there are very easy ways of discrediting renewable energies. One of my favorite ones is when people say it's too expensive. If we didn't do coal and oil and gas in the way that we did, as in massive economies of scale, they would be too expensive as well. The whole point is that renewables is as yet an upcoming, an increasing side of things. The overriding factor in all of this is that it's sustainable in the long term, that you can rely on the wind and the sun and the waves to be around and not to, quote, run out in the same way as our fossil deposits are. And that's something that people are, even now, not really cognizant of. When I talk, I just came back from the States, so I'm slightly jet-lagged. But in the States, that's still very much not understood. It's just absolutely been outsourced in terms of their thinking. They just don't consider that side of things at all. But again, because of their culture.
Well, it's bizarre when you consider the vast amounts of extremely sunny and empty desert they have, like in Arizona and Nevada. I mean, if they just coated enough of that space with some form of solar energy, I mean, they'd be able to generate a huge amount of power.
That'd be amazing. My favorite example is the Shasta Dam in Northern California, because people always say, who will build it? You just said it. Who will build it? Who will build the generator? Will it be the government? Will it not be?
Yeah.
No, California produces almost all of America's food. They produce 2 out of every 3 meals, they claim. And the Shasta Dam in Northern California prevents against flooding. It does irrigation, and it does... I've just forgotten the name of the energy. Hydroelectric energy. And they have 5 generators in this dam, and each generator can run Dayton, Ohio for a month if you turn the thing on for a day. So that's a phenomenal amount of energy. And they could run all 5 at once, but they don't. And they could feed all of California on hydroelectric energy to such a massive degree that it would drop everybody's energy bills almost completely. But they don't. And according to their own tour guide, who I went and saw this thing, their own tour guide said, we won't do that. Somebody said, why don't you just switch it on? Now, that's a great question from a Californian, because California has been having brownouts and blackouts that were actually engineered by the companies to bring the prices up.
Yeah.
This guy says, why don't you switch them on, man, and just cheapen everybody's energy? He said, we can't do that because it's a commodity. In other words, you had an agent of the government, and they are a government institution. They're the only government institution that turns a profit, by the way. How ironic that something that relies on an energy that's abundant is the only faction of a government that would actually make money rather than take it from you. He said that no, they can't, because of the market system, basically. Because as soon as it's a commodity, commodities cannot be shared, cannot be enjoyed, cannot be benefited from. So who's going to build it? They already did, and they're not using it. That's the answer. And that's the answer in many cases.
And yet, on the flip side, they're still busy kind of pushing the whole nuclear power issue, which is an industry that basically only runs properly because of the huge amount of subsidy money they throw at it. Absolutely.
James Corbett claimed that the nuclear power industry only exists because of the nuclear arms industry. I don't know. He might be right about that.
I think originally, like the way that it was developed was, I think he was talking specifically about Japan. on why they built those particular kind of reactors. And what it was is that they wanted the material on hand that could quickly be converted into the use of building nuclear weapons. And they figured that the best way to do it without having huge amounts of investment is kind of dual invest in the weapons tech and in the nuclear power generation. So I guess, when you got China next door and Russia just over there, I don't know, maybe it's a good idea, I don't know.
Sure. What do you hear from Fukushima where you are in the world?
Nothing.
Nothing at all?
No, honestly, there's no real discussion. Like Thailand is not the most enlightened of countries, I'll be honest with you. But to be fair, like Fukushima's on the other side of Japan. It's on the eastern side of Japan, and the way that the currents move, it's kind of pushing it out into the Pacific. So it's not too much of an issue for the Gulf of Thailand, and definitely not for the other side.
You will have seen those images of those giant containers that are now just everywhere on the Daiichi site, filled with radioactive water, millions and millions of tons of it.
Wasn't that their bizarre answer to just chucking it in the sea? Because people were kind of asking questions about the hundreds of tons of seawater that was being contaminated every day. And then they started putting in these containers, right? And then obviously that's not exactly a long-term solution. But I mean, to be honest with you, I hear conflicting reports on how intense the radiation is and in terms of its effects. Because some people are saying that that you're basically going to have radioactive fish washing up in America, and everyone's going to get poisoned. And there are other
claim
people.
The tuna is already there. They claim that the radioactive tuna can already be found.
Yeah. And then you have other.
But then are other people saying
so
not
large that it basically just waters it down to the point of being a slight health issue, but not Armageddon.
Wow.
So I have no idea. I have no idea. It's
one of the most difficult stories to pick apart, isn't it? Because it's so. I mean, Vice magazine sent a guy there to try and get on site, and they wouldn't let him go. And the guy who was sent with him by the government refused to wear a radiation suit. And if that's for PR purposes, just imagine what that must mean for that guy if he's walking into actually on site, so there's no dilution happening at all, and he's walking around without a radiation suit just so the government can make it seem like it's not dangerous. How long is he going to live? I wonder.
Well, it was amazing how many people volunteered to go in the aftermath of the disaster to help with the clean-up operation and to try and do that to put out the fires, etc. Yeah.
Have you watched the new Godzilla, by the way?
No, I haven't. No.
So I didn't realize this. I went to see Godzilla with someone who actually teaches film, and they explained to me that Godzilla isn't just some crazy monster movie. The first Godzilla film came out in the 1950s and was a direct psychological response to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's the giant leveling force that can't be controlled by humanity, and has a laser beam that comes out of its mouth that can destroy cities. And so it makes a lot more sense than just, let's build something like Jurassic Park. It's let's as a culture, let's digest what it means to have the atom bomb happen to us. And the latest Godzilla film is probably the most true to form, because it begins in a Japanese nuclear facility that undergoes a huge meltdown and kills many, many people.
Well, what's the reception been to the film in Japan? I mean, is it touching a raw nerve? Or?
Do you know? I don't know. Given the fact that they've made a film about Godzilla almost every year since the 1950s, I mean, it's so regular. I'd imagine it would probably be very well received, because he feeds on radioactive material in the film as well. I'd highly recommend it. It's a great film, actually. I really like the new Godzilla. I mean, it's stupid popcorn stuff, but it's not incorrect when it comes to the history of Godzilla itself. It's very, very explanatory almost, we forget we've never had a nuclear event in the UK. Not the way we've had Sellafield, but not the way where it's been an aggressive attack from the outside. No country has had that apart from Japan. And you really do realize that when you then watch the kind of cinema that has come from it, And then they have to deal with something like Fukushima. Can you imagine what that's like? This is such a psychological blind spot for us, but it must be so like shame-inducing for them, based on the fact that the biggest fear in their culture is that, really, that's why I mean, even all of their cinema is based around this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for some reason, I just had like a flashback to this program I saw. It was about Japanese earthquake preparation, and I remember being really astounded at all these structures that they built, like to protect cities from landslides, and they have these regular drills. And at the time, I thought, this is kind of neurotic, really, isn't it? I mean, it's okay to be prepared, but really, like a drill every 2 weeks, and kind of scaring the crap out of all the children, like every 2 weeks. But then now that we've talked about, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, maybe there is kind of a lingering fragility in the national psyche of, like, this impending doom. And if that is the case, then Fukushima is definitely going to have some serious psychic impacts as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the Kobe earthquake impacted, what was it, 1993, something like that, and it was just really huge. And I mean, and that, if that makes it across to here, we forget about the earthquakes in Iran, which happened. There was one that happened in 2005, I want to say, maybe earlier, and it was like Christmas Eve or Boxing Day. It was Boxing Day. And then it was like Boxing Day the year after as well. Like, it was within almost exactly a year. They had two major ones, and these two have really major effects. But Japan for some reasons had so many, and they have that certain form of organization because they're such a developed civilization. It can feel a bit neurotic to us, can't it? Because the Brits have just never had any of that stuff. The kind of earthquakes we get are sort of humorous news.
Yeah.
They're like, and in other news, and finally, Loughborough had a hilarious earthquake last night.
That's kind of what annoyed me about some of the anti-fracking arguments, is they were talking so much about fracking causing these ridiculously minor earthquakes, and I was just thinking, guys, that really isn't the issue here. Like, the issue is like groundwater and like the rampant kind of industrial pollution and like the corruption that's going on in terms of implementing the strategies, and stop talking about fucking earthquakes.
Although, do you know what? I had a chat with some geologists, and that's their big fear, is that the earthquakes are, really undersold. But I know what you mean. Like, water is like the ultimate argument there. It's like, listen, it not only is it net energy inefficient, so you're producing a non-renewable energy out of burning more energy in non-renewable energy to get it, but you're also irreversibly polluting the water supply. And they just had that recent study that showed that something like 2/3 of the fracking sites are above groundwater, like drinkable groundwater sites, and that therefore the impact would be direct.
Well, it did just occur to me that the earthquakes could cause a fracturing within the well casing, and that would be then leading to a greater risk of contamination. So I do rescind that previous outburst.
It's all right. Fracking's been really hard to judge. I mean, there have been. I mean, everyone mentions Gasland at this point, don't they? They go, "Oh, have you seen Gasland?" The thing is, Gasland has some bullshit in it as well, man. Like, at the moment, I work for a chemistry publisher, and I can search the latest scientific understandings on fracking, and while none of it makes you think, "Oh, this will be totally fine," the real problems that are mentioned, like, which are things like, does it contaminate the groundwater? They do tests on this, and it's not actually very obvious that it does in normal cases. But the real problem is things like the fact that fracked water is being cleansed, quote cleansed, I'm doing air quotes now, by pumping it back up. They run it through a cleaning process, and then they put it on the crops again in California. That's something that's not mentioned at all.
I think didn't they just get caught dumping it in the Manchester Ship Canal?
Did they? I did not know that.
It was some form of I don't want to tell a lie, but I think it was fracking water. It was some kind of industrial water anyway. It's from power generation or some kind of industrial process. But yeah, they got caught dumping it in the Manchester Ship Canal, and they were like, "Oh, it's okay, we've processed it." It's like, well, we've tested it, and yeah.
Yeah, bunch of liars, man. And that's happened since forever, I mean, this happened this was the story with Erin Brockovich as well, wasn't it? And every time there is a large amount of dangerous waste, whether it's nuclear, chemical, or energy related, it gets dumped somewhere secretly because why? Because it's definitely safe.
So have you seen that graphic? It's a map of all the weapons dumping sites they have in the oceans.
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's one of the scariest things you'll ever see. Like, it's just that, like, it's got like the dates and what they're dumping. It's like chemical weaponry that, like, they're like, oh well, this is kind of out of date, so we're just going to dump it in the middle of the Pacific. And there's a lot of sites, let's put it that way. It's just as impactful as a graphic as that video of all the nuclear explosions is. Like, it's one of those ones where you see it / watch it, and you just you've got your head in your hands thinking, what the hell is going on here?
So let's pull this into a general point then.
Well, I was thinking that if we go back earlier to like the way that people live almost oblivious to the idea of natural disaster and whatnot, what I was going to bring up was the idea that that the current society we live in, the economic structure, etc., it basically has people living in their own heads. People are living in a form of neurosis, basically, where they're not really kind of reacting to the environment as it is. They're kind of reacting to this kind of pseudo-social milieu that they're being kind of beamed into their minds through media, education, and etc., etc. So it's like, how do you actually bring people into a form of reality that is going to be, useful for them?
Having those kinds of maps almost gives you that, doesn't it? There's a perspective being built by our use of connective technologies that allows us to reverse that neurosis a bit, I think, where we can say these individuated events of different nuclear explosions, or like you say, weapons dumping or chemical dumping, we can forget about them on an individual level because there it is in the news and then it's gone. But then when you superimpose all of the cumulative effects onto one map, you have a cognitive shift happen. It's almost like seeing the Earth from space, and you suddenly realize how tiny our planet is and how fragile and how utterly unrelated it is in terms of life capacity to anything around it. And you suddenly go, oh, this is now going to inform the way I behave and the way I think and what I demand of my society and what I would endorse as a form of correct living. And that's really all that the Zeitgeist Movement can claim to do as an educational aspect, is to provide a form of cognitive shift and to connect, I suppose, like-minded people who are having that shift and promote that shift.
So would you describe the Zeitgeist Movement primarily as an educational movement as opposed to a political movement?
Definitely. Yeah, I've thought about this quite a lot. There are elements of our membership that have tried direct action, do direct action, also very active within anarchist communities who do a lot of direct action. Produce a lot of media. Some of them don't. Some of them are just self-developing. They read a lot of books. They write a lot of stuff. They just go to the social events. Some of them want the idea that they will be voted into politics at some point to change it from the inside, a little bit like the Green Party. Sure, it's valid, I suppose, if you think you can do it and buck the trend of phenomenal amounts of economic interest that dominate that arena. You think you can do it, that's great. Even if it just means getting the words resource-based economy on the ballot, like Richard Osmaston did in New Zealand. And some of them, we do events. There are loads of different ways of doing it, but ultimately I would say that the real drive of all of it in the end is going to be an educational bit. What's worth memorizing or keeping in your head, I suppose, is that the general attempts against all state power and current living, the way that we do things, how we value things, it's all one very large movement. If you combine Occupy and Anonymous and TZM and the Venus Project in their more direct sort of, I suppose, architectural elements, and any of those other ones that are talking about sustainability as it actually exists on the planet, not sustainability as in making business sustainable against the realities of the outside world.
I mean, there's also another form of sustainability, which is the idea that, you have these kind of technocratic elites, and then everyone else just kind of lives in poverty, and that's like their idea of sustainability.
Yeah. That's sustaining the status quo. That's what that is a subterfuge style stealing of the word sustainability. It's those people who really are using the real world as a referent for it that are united by their efforts, even if they don't get on with each other in real life. And by the way, that's a really good thing. It's a good thing that there isn't one big movement that combines everybody that TCM would be part of, because that's so much easier to control and fight. Yeah. And it's much more difficult when... Well. Yeah, exactly. And it's much better when you have elements like Anonymous that are uncontrollable and within them have factions too, and they don't know who each other person is. And yet they are the most effective when it comes to the attempts of corporate power against the internet.
Well, and they did recently they did a load of web hacks towards the Israeli government.
That's right. took it down a load of their websites, didn't they?
Yeah,
They've done that with Turkey as well. They've done it with Egypt. They did it with anybody who's tried to censor the internet. Last year, the American sheriff's departments had all of their credit cards and personal email addresses leaked onto like some paste bin site, you know?
I'm surprised they don't release more information though. They seem to do a lot of these web attacks, but I mean, do they release a lot of information in the same way that WikiLeaks do, or are they just primarily kind of a offensive organisation?
Another one. WikiLeaks is yet another one, man. Absolutely. They are selective in their leaks, I think. I mean, they don't release everything because some of it really would be dangerous. We don't, for example, want the 1918 flu virus to be available as a download on the internet. Yeah. And these days is very realistic to do. I mean, there are incredible amounts of data.
They just had the scandal, right? Well, I say scandal, like the hoo-ha in America over like the lab technicians that were actually asked to work on the 1918 influenza and one of the CDC centres, and they basically blamed it on the technicians, if I remember correctly, and they sacked these technicians, and none of the actual higher brass that are getting them to do particularly dangerous research in these level 4 biolabs were held to account at all.
Sure. You know, this is the thing. But all of those elements, the fact that they're not united is a good thing. So we represent, I think, broadly an educational aspect, you know. We're almost the sort of librarians of sustainability, in that we have to organise and conflate and keep up to date the information in a digestible form for ordinary people.
So where would you say TZM stands in regards to some of the more elitist environmental clubs? I mean, Club of Rome springs immediately to mind. I mean, where do you stand on that?
My understanding is limited of people like the Club of Rome, but I'll explain it this way. That was an attempt by Heinberg, wasn't it, and several other people to bring to the fore a conversation about limits, the limits to growth. Yeah. The idea that it wasn't just an unending, plunderable 1980s style view of the world that could be sustained. Now, that's correct. Now, the problem is that because Heinberg et al. Didn't have yet the internet to contend with, and because the early pioneers of the ecosystem wrongly decided that they could predict things on their hilariously small amount of information, that they then went with the idea that you could have it's a phrase that we use as well, but we use it differently, sort of a sustainable current state of things, a status quo sustainability, sort of trying to work out almost like an equilibrium economy, you know. Yep. Get to where we are now, carry on doing what we are now, and don't do any more, and that's fine. That's not sustainability, because the very operation of every day demands the use of more, and is also pollutive enough by itself that if you just carried on doing the same thing every year, you would destroy the planet as well. So Heinberg and all the rest of it were wrong on that, and that's where they earn their idea of being elitist from, because it supports the way things are. However, do give them some credit, though. Give them some credit for having to have the worst of conversations with those who absolutely found that to be the most heinous thing to ever say.
Well, there are plenty of industrialists that were members of Club of Rome. I mean, I only skimmed Limits to Growth, to be honest with you. The most interesting release is the First Global Revolution from 1979, if I remember correctly. And it's basically talking about how environmentalism and the threat of environmental catastrophe is basically going to be the most useful governance tool for the 21st century, because they start off with a thesis of, well, you know, we're going to need some form of global governance because, you know, it's more efficient, etc., all the usual kind of things. We need to stop war. But then they run into this problem of how are we going to maintain, you know, the ruling status quo if there is no threat of war to kind of scare the population with. And the ingenious solution that they proffer is that the way they can keep a global regime going is by making the environment the main enemy. So you kind of make people the enemy of themselves, you know, humanity the enemy of themselves. And I remember reading that, I just thought it just sounded like really dystopian stuff, you know. So, and then I started looking at who was actually a member of Club of Rome. And yeah, they are an exceptionally elitist kind of bunch. You've got the aristos, you have CEOs, industrialists, you know, major political figures. And, I mean, I'll send you a link to the document after we finish, but it's definitely worth a read.
Yeah, please. I'm not familiar with that one. I know the report from Iron Mountain, which they claimed was a fiction. Have you come
Yeah, is
across this
that?
one?
Yeah, is that real? Or?
Well, look, this is as far as I got with this. I didn't bother reading it, but it's mentioned in The Creature from Jekyll Island by Griffin, who is a little bit of a credulous author when we remember also that he was writing about how they discovered Noah's Ark. But let's treat his work in abstraction and not tar him with the same brush as his other work. The report from Iron Mountain is apparently leaked, I think, to the press, or it's published accidentally. Some way it finds its way into the central American narrative, and it does exactly what you've just described. It says that actually, really, we need large events that will terrify everybody, so we can sort of create a world government, and that's the best way. War is actually not a good thing by itself, and the threat of war is, however, a fantastic way of controlling people, and all this kind of very dystopian stuff.
Oh, I swear the Cold War. I mean, that was fantastic in a sense that there was always this threat of Armageddon.
That's right.
It wouldn't surprise me, to be honest with you, and I say this to my friends all the time. If 80% of the missiles that they spent trillions building were just empty, and it was just a massive way of ingesting a lot of money and investing it elsewhere. And there's some kind of little pact between the USSR and the USA, just never to actually go to war and just to use it as a domestic governance tool. And in terms of geostrategy as well, the Cold War was a fantastic way of splitting almost every country in the world into one of two camps. Because if you're going to build some form of global system, I mean, economically, they did it in the 40s with the World Bank and Bretton Woods system, etc., etc. But to do it politically, it's very hard to do it a country at a time. And the Cold War was fantastic because it made every country in the world make a choice between one of two different political camps. And now it seems, in the wake of 1990 and in the current kind of global situation, you basically have this global regime.
It's interesting. I was just reading why people think it's real, and the statement that's made in Griffin's book is that of because it was actually published by Dial Press. It really was published. It wasn't leaked. The Washington Post featured in 1967, which was the year it came out, a feature by Herschel McLandris that published sort of a critique of it. And Herschel McLandris demanded that it were real because they had been invited. And Herschel McLandris' real name is John Kenneth Galbraith, who was a very well-known, very well-respected economist, whose son is also an economist as well. And he says that he was invited to be on the panel for the report from Iron Mountain. And he even admitted in a press release this as well. I think, actually, hang on, it says a couple of weeks later.
I always assumed it was almost like a modern version of the, protocols of Zion. It's kind of like a random release that would turn out to be a bit of a hoax.
Yeah, I mean, well, with the protocols, we really know that they are a hoax. I mean, it's unfortunate because even that is still promoted by really strange people as being absolutely true. But when you actually have the literary prehistory of it, and you can read the books, and you can see that they're stealing not even out of whole cloth from places that were about nothing to do with the Jews. That's somehow still a thing. I mean, what was it? The man who gave us the Model T, Henry Ford himself, published his own version of the protocols and had it distributed. Yeah. And then actually apologized for it years later when it was made obvious to him that it was a complete fraud. But just all the damage that's done is incredible. I mean, you've got people like, any conspiracy theorist who has to sell books seems to still damn well talk about it. My favorite is the guy who made that. He made his money making a board game. Oh, what's his name? He's such a crazy bastard. I'm not going to give his name out, even if I can work it out, because he doesn't deserve the coverage. But he made his money making a board game. Yeah, he made his money making a board game, and then now, because he doesn't have to work, he can just write horrendous things online, and he just writes just the most phenomenal stuff about just the protocols and all the rest of it. But yeah, we very much know that was imported by Tsarist secret police, and essentially can be thanked for having created most of the impetus for the world wars that followed, and their inflections upon Jewish hatred.
Well, I don't know about blaming the world wars on it. In,
No,
in terms of
the vectors. So the particular pogroms, the pogroms that had been happening in pre-World War One Russia,
okay. Yeah.
being imported into the absolutely, definitely going to happen anyway. World War One and Two. Yeah. Yes. No. It'd be quite something to say that it was just that. No.
So what's the verdicts on the Iron Mountain one?
I can't say any more. Really. I think the most I could say, because Galbraith seemed to go quiet when he was asked about the conspiracy. He said he was part of the conspiracy, ha ha ha, in a press release. Yeah. And then someone said, "Oh, come on, give us more details." Then he fell silent and said, "No, they were misquoting me." So I think he probably at that point thought it was just getting silly.
But it is kind of silly, isn't it? Because in terms of like everyone seems to think there's some kind of giant secret to uncover, but really it's right in plain view. I mean, if you go and you look at the setting up of the Bretton Woods system, as referenced earlier. You go and read the charter. I mean, it's ridiculous. Right? there are things written in that charter that, I mean, Nero would have loved in terms of, not being able to be sued, not being liable for any country's laws, basically being some kind of like global sovereign authority. I mean, what the hell is that? I mean, if that's not a conspiracy, then what is? And that's like that's one of the leading economic, power structures on the planet. And yet, most people don't seem to even understand what the Bretton Woods system was. They don't really seem to understand what the IMF and the World Bank do. They don't know what's going on in Basel. They don't know about the Bank of International Settlements. It's like, well, the big secret you're longing to discover is right there on Wikipedia, and you can go and download free copies of all their charters and treaties. And it's right there for you. There's no hidden plan or anything like that.
Exactly, and the TTP, which is the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that is hidden. And guess what? It's exactly the same as the stuff that you just mentioned that's out in the open. Yep. All it is they're trying to further cement it. It's absolutely... There's something about knowledge that is attractive when it's secret or hidden. That's why esotericism is so interesting as a psychological
some of the people that I see, because obviously when you first kind of start reading into political things and you think, right, okay, I'm gonna enlarge my scope of vision, I'm gonna go hunting for things that necessarily aren't obvious, and you find that some of these oddballs, what's his name? There's a guy called Michael Tsarian, and it's all like kind of global governance and like weird witchcraft from Ireland, pseudo historical facts mixed with tarot astrology, and I'm just
the Black Pope. Do you know I once downloaded like 9 hours of his stuff to see, because his name kept coming up. I was like, oh, let's give it a go. Yeah. And he talks about sort of the helicopters that appeared on Egyptian walls, and it takes you about 9 seconds of research to find that that's utterly false. Yeah. And then just over and over and over again. And I was like, after about 10 of them, I was like, delete all this shit.
I'm not sure. Ridiculous. I mean, are these people like, are they mad, or are they making money, or are they like paid stooges from like the intelligence agencies? I mean, I can just never figure it out.
No, I often ask myself, would they say it if they didn't have to earn a buck?
Yeah.
Would they say it for free? And
but it's
in
funny,
some scenarios,
to this day, you'll still see people on YouTube like, oh, look, it's Michael Tsarian, let's go and interview Michael Tsarian. It's like, what the fuck are you doing, guys? Like, who cares what he thinks about anything?
But there's a certain need for power in the human psyche. We need to feel part of the power process, as Theodore Kaczynski called it. That our will can mean something into action. That we can do things and that we can achieve things, and that we somehow become part of a club. And I think that's where the idea of, secret conspiracies is so exciting. You're like, oh, I know something I wasn't meant to. I got, my power process has been fulfilled. Mm-hmm. Even though, as you rightly say, man, that all you have to do is just keep up to date with the structure of your government. That's all you need to do.
I do think there are kind of secretive initiatives, and, I do think there are things that happen behind the scenes. I mean, to me, that seems pretty obvious.
But those things are advertised in the external literature. It's not that we found out.
Yes and no. I mean, it depends on the time frame. I mean, for example, if you'd gone up to someone in the 1970s and you'd started talking about, there's this thing called Operation Gladio, right? Yeah, and all those bombings in Italy, yeah? It's the government, it was the government. And they would look at you like you were absolutely fucking insane. But now it's just like, you open up a book and you're like, okay, all right. And
Operation Gladio, that's right.
Yeah, and it's the same in terms of like all intelligence operations, right? Especially when it's cultural. That seems really hard to persuade people on. I mean, I was talking to my friend today about there's a book called The Mighty Wurlitzer, and it was about cultural warfare in the US that was kind of carried out by the CIA. There's another good book about it as well by what's it called? I think it's just called CIA and the World of Arts and Letters, or something like that. Anyway, but yeah, it's about all the like Operation Mockingbird and the idea of like putting these cultural figures out there and having them say a slightly ridiculous thing, like paying people to produce like utterly nasty, nihilistic artwork to kind of to see what the effects would be on specific kind of arty communities. And I mean, again, if you'd approached people in the 60s and said, yeah, you see all this art, right? Yeah, CIA paid for that, yeah, to mess with your mind. And you'd sound like an absolute, lunatic. But now you can go back and you look at these kind of documents that have been declassified, and you're like, oh, okay, that was the case.
Really was the case, that's right. Yeah, well, it's all part of the process. As
rather
was
than
once
dwelling on the problems and dwelling on the history, maybe we should talk again about like moving forward with some things. And maybe we could start with some suggestions that you could give people who, they work a 9-to-5 job. They don't have a lot of kind of mental energy left after getting through their toil every day. And I mean, do you have any recommendations on things they could do lifestyle-wise that might make a difference?
I can tell you what I did, or what I plan to do. But the first one, most obviously, is to get yourself informed as much as you can. That's an annoying thing because everyone says it all the time. But there are a great many reading materials that we advertise that come from outside of our movement. They're not written by us. We don't sell them. Get to grips with it. Start learning how it works. A good one is to read up on how logical fallacies work, because that's the method by which people are shortcut, and how the public is non-engaged in their demands. The second one is you can change the way you consume things. I've switched my energy provider to one who generates renewable energies. Not buys it, but generates it. I've switched my lifestyle to be almost completely not using factory farming of any kind, really. Some people call it veganism. I call it whole foods. So I do that because it has a huge impact on my footprint. My footprint's not a good one because I do a lot of flying around the world and I do a lot of driving. So I have to make it up somewhere else. And I figured with all the health consequences, and as well as the ethical and environmental ones, that's a fairly decent one to do. It may not be for you for other reasons. You may have problems with like specific health needs. It's not a demand, but it's what I did. You can think about whether you should be voting or not, and when you should be and when you should not be. I strategically voted the last time because there appeared to be a real swing towards the right. Didn't do anything. The right still got in, but that's the only time I do that.
By tandeming onto a left party.
Exactly right. And then there are things like, can you afford yourself a 3D printer? If so, get one. Can you afford yourself an electric car? If so, get one, and get the right one as well. Get one that really is efficient.
Because I'm really not a big fan of the old electric cars.
Really?
Yeah,
why is that?
I mean, I read a study, or it might be just an article actually, maybe it's a bit grandiose term, but and it was basically saying that if you buy an old Land Rover and you run it into the ground over the course of 10 years, you basically save far more resources than you would if you bought a brand new electric car. So
that's true in the sense that if you don't ever run out of really old Land Rovers and run them into the ground,
of course.
That may be true.
There's going to have to be a replacement for that. But I mean, if you're talking about an immediate kind of action, then
Sure. The argument I was using pro the electric car, because I've got ones against it too. It's certainly not perfect. The one that's for it is it's energy agnostic. It can use any form of energy as long as it's turned into electricity. While we still have combustion engines on board, there's nothing you can do but rely on combustible energy. But once you have that combustion either centralized somewhere else or becoming replaced by, for example, solar or wind or whatever, you would have a car that is ready to adopt any direction we tend to go with our energy. That's a definite plus compared to combustion engines. I think we are going to find, almost like you were saying, with like trying to talk to people in the past with what we know in the future. I think the idea one day that we used to combust while going down the street near human lungs and the horrendous problems that would afford our health is going to be as amazing as smoking in bars is to us already after only about 7 years of the smoking ban.
It's already strange. I mean, if you tried to introduce the car today, I mean, I don't know if people would really care about the pollution. They probably prefer the ease with which you could travel. But if you said to people, Yeah, what you're going to do, right? Anyone over 17 is going to be able to drive 2 tons of solid steel around, and it's going to be powered by this really flammable liquid that everyone's just going to fill up on every street corner. And they'd be like, "No way! That's crazy dangerous. We can't have people doing that." And yet, because it's normal, because it was already introduced. Like no one even questions it.
That's right. So there's that as well. You can look into things like local housing cooperatives and local cooperatives generally. There will be a tool library near you. There will be a housing cooperative near you. There will be community gardening near you. There will be edible gardens near you. Support these, even only if by word of mouth, and have people know about them.
Well, word of mouth is really important. Conversations are deadly important,
Absolutely.
I mean, Carl Jung had this great quote, something like, if there's any kind of meeting of minds, it's like a chemical reaction. Both of the minds are changed. So if even just having one conversation with a person, I mean, aside from might cheer them up or something, if you can impart like a good argument on one particular issue that makes them think, oh, I don't know, and then drives them to YouTube or a search engine, and that might start a whole self-education process. And I mean, especially if you're already friends with someone and you can kind of like drop little bits here and there. It's good, it gets people thinking. You'd be surprised how receptive a lot of people are, because let's face it, modern life is really stressful, and if you can introduce some kind of solutions on the horizon and get rid of that feeling of helplessness that is so often created by the industrial system, then that's a positive thing.
And that's the bit, and that was where I was going to end up. Actually, I was going to say the final thing is, do not give up. Do not allow yourself to be, as they used to say, do not let the bastards grind you down.
Yep.
Don't allow the general feeling of helplessness, which is loved by the culture because it can then sell you more stuff based on trying to assuage that guilt or that need or that desperation. Don't let that happen. Accept that, yes, we are in a tremendously difficult period of history. It has always been difficult and horrendous, and now it's globally difficult and horrendous. But don't let that defeat you, and try and keep a spring in your step, even as we try and save the widening gyre from collapsing and things falling apart.
It's odd though, isn't it? Because there's almost this schizophrenic divide between the individual and the collective destinies. Because a lot of people today, at an individual level, actually have the best lives that have ever existed in human history. And yet when you pan out and you realise, but at the same time there are more people in slavery today than were ever in slavery before, we're doing untold amounts of damage to the planet. It's odd. It's a huge divide.
It's where your thought process has to begin. Yeah. That's the great realization, and it's worth doing. And it's much better than hoping for a better world in the afterlife. It's much better than just giving up and going, oh, well, fuck it, I'm just going to chase the money and do as well as I can. You can.
Well, I mean, people like that just tend to burn out anyway, right? I mean.
Yes, absolutely, and that's when you end up sounding crazy, and that's when people don't listen to your worldview, and that's very important. Is people are not going to take you seriously if you just sound dour and horrendous.
I think we've all had days like that.
You got to appear to be profiting off this worldview in an intellectual sense. Yeah, you got to be doing well.
You got to have some fire in your belly.
That's exactly right. Yes, I don't know. There we go. How about you? What would you recommend to the listener? I've only touched on a few bits and bobs, and surely things that will make people shout. But
yeah, I mean, I'd reiterate everything you said, obviously, but also, I think networking is really important, because the way the current system works, it's always trying to divide everyone into these neurotic little boxes where we sit and we waste our lives in front of a screen, and then we toddle off to the office the next day, or whatever your job happens to be, and all the old social networks that we used to have that were for protecting the interests of the working people, like things like the working man's clubs, they're all kind of like largely disappeared. Like the pubs that used to be scenes of like lively discussion, everyone's now watching mass commercial sports in them. The unions where people used to get together and organise, they've been degraded to the point now where we're not even sure if they're effective anymore. So just make a start by creating like a little community. Even if you're a community of one in the beginning, put on a documentary night. Start a podcast, like anything you want, really.
I absolutely agree. And one last thing, exercise. do this. I've started doing this in the last couple of years after many, probably a decade of not really exercising at all. It has huge social effects as well as personal ones. I mean, it'll make you, of course, healthier, but listen, it'll make you less of a medical burden on the community. That's a big deal, man. 10% of the costs of the NHS are now on type 2 diabetes, which are nothing but the result of a sedentary, high-fat, high-salt diet, okay? So get out there and run. Even if you don't change your diet, run like shit, do some cycling. I just saw the start of the Tour de France happened just down the road from me here in Leeds, and we went over and had a look. And I tell you what, man, maybe it's a selection bias or positive bias of some kind, but it looks like more people have been on their bikes since then. And the millions of people that turned out to cheer these people on was so huge. And you know, it's a great uniter as well as a real, like I say, a real alleviation on the healthcare system, which is already overburdened anyway. And it'll make you feel better, and it'll make you look sexier and all the rest of it. As well.
I mean, in terms of like the epigenetics as well, it's going to change you almost entirely. Like, I mean, within the space of about 7 to 8 years, if you exercise regularly and you eat correctly and you stimulate your brain, you will be an entirely different person. And I think it's really important these days to realise that we do have a chance to basically evolve as a species in terms of the new communications technology, in terms of what about nutrition and child rearing, etc., which I think the child rearing was covered in one of the Zeitgeist movies, if I remember correctly.
Yes, it was. It was in the third one. It was the idea of if the cells that would normally create an eye are not affected by light, then the eye will just never come to be. And it's true of all of those emotional circuits as well. Yeah, absolutely.
We're plastic beings. We're kind of born as not necessarily a blank slate, but with a big kind of sliding scale of potential, let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And you have to take it into your own hands. Like, okay, how far can I push the needle for myself? So even if you don't care really about what happens for the rest of the world, like for your own self-development, for your own, will to be, it's always good to kind of take hold of your own evolution and not allow the football and the X Factor and the cheap lager and the mindless monotony of the office job to push you.
That's right. And I would also say your point of starting a podcast, by the way, is a really good thing as well. I found myself, particularly now that I've got really good podcasting apps, I found really good ones that, it's unfortunate, the ones that are paid are usually the best ones. They're the ones that find the good stuff for you. But like, since I've started doing that, most of my media consumption comes from podcasting now and not from the media. Now, some of it's still the BBC podcast, for example. It's not all just random people. But there's been a huge swing from radio and everything that meant to all of the independent media in the world, and has a huge effect on you.
I swear, I learned far more from things like the Corbett Report than I ever did from my university course.
Yeah. Oh, that's definitely true of me as well. Absolutely. Yeah. There we go.
So did you want to wrap up? Is there any kind of closing statement? Any websites you need people to go and take a look at, or perhaps your book?
My closing statement would be this. Be the change you want to see in the world was not said by Gandhi, but he may as well have said it. And now I've said it, and I want you to say it as well, and then everything will be fine. I mean, if you want to dig into TZM's materials, I would recommend the Zeitgeist Movement Defined, which is free online. It's about $1 or £1 on Amazon if you want to read it on Kindle, which you don't have to have a Kindle device for. You can use their free Kindle Cloud Reader. Or you can buy the book as well. That's the encapsulation of pretty much 5 years' worth of work. If you want to dig into the other stuff, all of the references, there's about 300 and something at least. No, there are more, 300 different sources, maybe more than that, actually. 900 maybe. I used to know the number. Check out people like Buckminster Fuller. Check out people like Jeremy Rifkin. Do check out people like Andrei Lobachevsky, who've been swallowed up by history but have a really clear train of thought, also available on Kindle now. Read random books on public health that you would never read normally. Just grab a thing off the shelf and see where it leads you. It's really good to do that. That's how I did my public health lecture last year. It was not an area I'd ever thought of. Just test yourself. Just go randomly into areas that you've never gone into, knowing that you've never gone into them. You're not going to be an expert, and you may come to some sort of bizarre conclusion. But it's a really good way of expanding your worldview, especially now that so much stuff is available online. And dig into the podcast, test everything, check everything, and just see where it gets you, man. I think it's fascinating. My first 5 years of this, which have been the last 5 years, has been really, really enriching and interesting, and I'm by no means good at it yet, but it's worth doing. It's a really great hobby to have.
Fantastic. I completely agree. And from my own selfish kind of perspective, I'm definitely, hopefully, going to learn a lot from the guests that I have on. And, if nothing else is achieved other than a little bit of cognitive development and the ability to speak into a microphone with reasonable pronunciation, then I'll consider it a success.
Good stuff. Thank you very much for having me, Simon.
It's a pleasure, sir. I'll speak to you soon.